In this video, we're going to be looking at a PAILs rail setup for knee external rotation in a seated position on the floor like this. Now, rotation of the knee is something that is often overlooked and not considered. When we think of the knee joint, we just think of extension and flexion of the knee, that kind of kicking up and down of it. But the knee does have the capacity to both externally rotate and internally rotate. It has a small degree of it, and it's important to have that capacity when we look at what the knee joint is. So when we think of it, what we're addressing here is, by doing this PAILs rails effort, is we're trying to open up space in the joint capsule of the knee. So we're trying not to think of, like, say, the big overlying muscles like the quadricep, the hamstring, the adductors, those muscles that sort of connect to the knee joint and help us move the knee. What we're actually trying to consider here is that just deepest layer of what the knee joint is. And when we think of the capsule, it's essentially that area, that space between the two bones. And if that joint capsule doesn't express that movement of both internal and external rotation, then the capsule itself is very limited. And the way you think of that is, if the capsule, the space between the two bones, is very limited, then it doesn't matter what these big muscles do. If that joint capsule, that space between the two bones, just isn't there, then any movement that we do with the knee is going to be sort of compromised or lessened in some way. We won't have the adequate range of motion in the joint itself, so who cares what we end up doing with those sort of big muscles, okay? So when it comes to assessing, we can see from here essentially that if we take what would be the little bony prominence at the front of the shin, just where the patella connects into the shin, we've got this thing here called the tibial tuberosity. So a little sort of bony prominence. And what we're trying to identify here is, can we actually internally rotate the knee? That would be sort of driving, and sort of, you can see here that foot sort of moving down towards the floor, in towards myself. That would be internal rotation. Has the tibial tuberosity moved? And then when I move the opposite direction, has the orientation of that tibial tuberosity actually moved when I go into external rotation, okay? So for some of us, we just don't have that capacity to actually move between internal and external rotation. And by doing this PAILs rails effort, that's actually gonna help us open up and strength train within that range. So if you're someone with very weak knees, or you've had knee trouble in the past, then you might assess this and find that actually you don't have the capacity to either internally, externally rotate, and doing something like this is going to be a really great way to open up that workspace, and, as I said, strength train within that workspace, okay? In terms of actually setting up for this, what you can do here is, if you want to make it a little bit easier on yourself, you can set up with a block underneath the knee. It's just going to mean keeping an upright posture, or keeping an upright torso is a little bit easier for you. Otherwise, you can go without it. But the idea here is, if you're working on your left side, then you're going to take your left hand and you're essentially going to place it on the inside, or the big toe side of your left foot. And you can see here, by putting a little bit of pressure down and pushing that foot down towards the floor, I bring my knee into external rotation. I kind of have to make sure to some degree that I'm in dorsiflexion as well. I'm not just sort of loosely letting the toes sort of drop towards the floor. I actually have to engage the front of the shin, bring my toes towards my knee, and then I can place that left hand on the inside of my big toe, okay? I then want you to take what would be your right hand, and if you take your right hand, put it underneath the knee, and then grab onto what would be your left forearm. That's going to have you just in a much better position for when we get to our PAILs rails effort a little bit later, to kind of create some tension with the upper body, okay? So from here, what we're going to do is, we're just going to chat about this position and go through some of the specifics of it. I'm going to set the timer for 2 minutes, and we're actually going to go through a PAILs rails drill. So you're more than welcome to sit down and actually have a go at this with me. So by sitting here, as I said, with the block if necessary, if you find this is a very sort of weird position to be in, not too comfortable, then by all means set yourself up with just a little bit of a prop underneath the hips, so that you don't feel too bad with your back. But if you're fine, if you've got enough range of motion in the hips to actually allow for a more upright posture, then you're fine from here. What we should be doing from here is sort of actively pushing down with our hand. By pushing the hand down into the foot, it's just getting us into more of a passive stretch of the knee. We should be feeling a little bit of a tension around the knee. Now, if you're someone with a weak joint or a compromised joint, an injured joint in some way, and just your knee needs to be worked on in some way, what you want to make sure here is that you're not being too aggressive with kind of achieving the position. If it's compromised in some way, all I'd say is go very light with the stretch this first time round. don't sort of yank at it in any way. It's the same way if you had a very weak or compromised shoulder, I'd be telling you to just sort of come back out of the stretch a little bit and not be too aggressive with the PAILs rails work that we're about to do. It means then when we get to our contractions, we're not sort of busting our ass trying to go as hard and strong as we can, because if we've got a weak and compromised joint, it's probably not the best thing to be overloading it far too quickly. So if you are having issues with the knee, just go to maybe 50% effort in terms of your overall sort of push that you're about to do for your PAILs rails work. Don't go past that the first time round, see how you feel afterwards, and if you can go a little bit stronger the next time, bump it up maybe an extra 10%, but be that bit cautious with this if you do have an injury or an issue with the knee, okay? But from this position here, we've almost got our timer going for us for 2 minutes. We're gonna inhale, irradiate tension throughout the entire body. I want you to imagine every single muscle in the body is now stiffened up, and very slowly I want you to start driving your foot into your hand. So you're essentially initiating knee internal rotation by driving the foot into the hand. Now remember, it's an isometric contraction, so nothing should move, so your hand has to be very stiff and stop it from actually moving. Make sure that you're feeling some sort of work around the knee, but being that bit cautious if you find that you should be if you've got a weak or compromised knee in some capacity. Keep driving up towards what percentage of effort you can work at for today. Now very slowly go into your rails effort. Drive your foot away from your hand. You're essentially driving and trying to actively achieve more knee external rotation. Your hand is still there, but the tension is the opposite way now. You're trying to drive what would be the pinky side of your foot towards the floor or your knee into external rotation. Let the breath go. Exhale, try to relax in this position. So now you're not active in any way with the foot, but you are just sort of holding your hand there against it just to kind of keep you in a bit of a passive stretch. You should be able to sort of assess how you felt after that. So if that felt relatively easy and didn't feel like you were struggling in any way, bump up the percentage effort this second PAILs rails effort just a little bit higher. You can think of the internal tension of the body being that little bit higher as well. Plenty of ways that we can sort of increase the percentage effort on this, okay? Let's take that breath in again. In through the nose, hack it into the lower abdomen. Everything starts to slowly stiffen up. Keep your hands nice and stiff. Now very slowly start driving your foot into your hand. But remember, we're working on the knee here, so I want you to think of the movement originating from the knee. Visibly speaking, the foot is driving into the hand, but internally we're trying to get this knee to rotate. That's where the movement is originating from. Every second that goes by, add an extra little bit of effort, all the way up towards a greatest, safest max effort for today. Keep increasing provided you have the capacity to do so. Tension is going to go the opposite way. 3, 2, 1. Now start driving the foot away from the hand. Keep the tension in the front of the shin, actively trying to achieve more external rotation. Keep the hand there, don't come out of the position. Keep driving, keep driving. Keep squeezing, really engage with the leg. Now take a breath, let it go. Ramp down, let all the tension go from the body. So you can see we haven't come out of the position in any way. I know I took my hands off there to sort of demonstrate 1 or 2 things, but you should have essentially stayed in a very similar position. Nothing pretty much changed, but the tension that you were working with and what you were pushing with changed for both the PAILs rails effort. So it was isometric, nothing technically moved, but the intent, the direction of the contraction was what you were controlling, okay? Keep focusing on your breathing, keep relaxing, stay in that passive stretch. We've still got another, say, 10 seconds before we come out of this position. Breathing, relaxing. Very slowly, what I want you to do is just take the hand off the leg, let your knee return to sort of its more neutral position, and you can let the leg just sort of relax there for a moment. So likely that you felt like a good bit of tension on the shin as we were trying to keep a good bit of dorsiflexion, and you should have felt a tiny bit of movement or a tiny bit of work being done by what would have been the internal and external rotators of the knee. So as I said with that one, very, very good movement if we need to open up some workspace in the knee, if you have any sort of limitations in either knee internal or external rotation. But like that, you're just being as cautious as you should be if it's an area of yours that is quite weak and just the capacity of it needs to be brought up. We've just got to make sure that we work below that capacity so that when we strength train, we bring up the capacity over time and eventually it's a strong and capable joint, just like it would be with the shoulder, with the hip, whatever it is. I know for a lot of people it can be a case where like we have a weak or compromised knee, so it's not that we just completely avoid any direct work on the knee, we just have to make sure that we work below our current capacity for that joint, okay? If you have any questions on that, I know it might be confusing sort of assessing and understanding what would be the movements of the knee, so if you have any questions, be sure to leave it in the comments section. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the page if you want to see more videos like this in the future. But for the moment, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.